Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished leader from the world of fintech from Oregon, USA, Mr. Remzi Bajrami. Remzi, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh. It's good to be here.
Thank you. Remzi is an author, and he's the co-founder of the Common Planet Foundation, which is a global initiative to evolve our economic system to creditism. So, Remzi, before we talk about Common Planet Foundation and creditism, tell me a little bit about your own journey and what inspired you to create this amazing platform.
Sure. Well, it was my daughter who inspired me to create this. And it came from, like everyone else, we all are paying attention to the world, and we're constantly being bombarded and told about all the problems in the world. And so my daughter, who was 16 years old at the time, walked in and basically said, shut up and start looking for solutions instead.
Right.
And so me having a background in finance, I began to, investigate the world of finance, specifically in economics, to discover, that the system that we have at present obviously is at the root cause, and it's not allowing for solutions to be, implemented. Then can we, change the economic system so that we can basically solve more of our problems? Because they seem to be that they all fundamentally were rooted within economics itself. And so then that began our journey.
Amazing. And for my viewers and listeners, tell me a little bit more about the Common Planet Foundation and what does creditism mean?
Sure. So that meant the journey that I mentioned began 9 years ago. And at that time, we were calling ourselves Earth Vote. Our notion was that somehow any change that's implemented in the world would have to be essentially chosen or voted in by people, hence, Earth Vote. And then a couple of years later, we changed the name to Common Planet because that's the more holistic vision of trying to unify the world around a new economics. And at that time, we already had a notion of creditism, the economic system, but it didn't have a name yet. And as a matter of fact, I wrote my book in 2022 titled Common Planet, A New Game of Life. And even then, about 6 months later is when finally the word creditism came, and we latched onto that and we began to use that. And the reason being is that that all money comes from credit, and that creditism differs from capitalism in that the credit, instead of it being debt-based, it's pure credit. And so that's the fundamental foundational difference between the two systems, that one is rooted in credit issued as debt, and here creditism is credit issued directly as credit itself.
And, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you another question on this, but can you explain the difference between credit itself and credit as a form of debt?
Certainly. So credit is in the current system is something that humans issue. There are units of choice making. So similar to a vote, wherein society can confer these choice making units to people, they're currencies, right? But in capitalism, because it's a game fundamentally of owning, commodities and assets and the real things of the world, we turn the currency, the credit, also into a commodity and an asset called money. And that's why historically has been, the physical forms of currency and credit have been in existence. Now, credit, all forms of currency come from credit, meaning, they're from the value society allows these things, and we believe them to exist. And so because of double entry accounting in banking, they realize that they can create units of credit based on the existing capital, but issue it as a debt, because in creating it, they also needed to repay it. But in creditism, because we're fundamentally not fighting over the real assets of the world. They're
Mm,
essentially unowned at that point in time. The credit simply is a choice-making unit for our desires in the physical world. So, the credit is issued and then it's deleted and spent when you acquire something from the commons. And so once you acquire something for consumption or use, the credit disappears. It doesn't
mm,
have to be exchanged to somebody else in exchange for their capital because the capital isn't already pre-distributed to an owner. Whereas in
mm,
capitalism, we have fought all these battles and we
mm.
continue to fight all the battles of the world to own all the common resources. And then we create the credit and then give the credit to those owners. And so, but in creditism, we say, we don't need to pre-distribute and fight over the common resources of the world. We can simply account for them and recognize that they exist, and then use the credit as a choice-making unit that disappears. And so there's no more of this game of fighting over ownership and valuing each other in our contributions based on our ability to exchange these various forms of assets and capital, and all the inherent problems that causes.
Great response. Thank you. And, when I was reading about you to prepare for my conversation with you, I was interested to see that, you talk about addressing core needs for life, liberty, and love.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more, and how will Creditism or the Common Planet Foundation address this?
That's a great question. Thank you. So, at the core of creditism, right, is the notion that the currency, is a mathematical unit, and it
Hmm.
is distributed by society and such. And so, if we can distribute the credit units equitably, infinitely to all people, then we can make sure that life is enabled, that everyone has access to the resources of the world, because through the distribution of credit, every person will have the ability to live, because you
Hmm.
will always be able to get credit in the form of a UBI or participation or
Yeah.
however society determines, and that enables life. Right.
Hmm.
Whereas at present, life isn't guaranteed. You must do something to that in order to acquire a thing after. So, you're not given life. You're essentially forced to to prove that you deserve to exist and you deserve to be fed. Whereas here, it's guaranteed. We distribute the credit units. You're able to purchase what you need to survive and thrive, and so that assures life. And liberty, likewise,
Hmm.
is the notion of democracy, right? We already understand fundamentally from history that humans, they value fairness. As a matter of fact, fairness is embedded in everything that we do. Even in our economics, we attempt to make it fair. All of our sports, all of our other interactions, the notion of democracy, of having a voice in
Hmm.
being able to distribute that the choice making, to all people, is the element of fairness. And so liberty is that, meaning we can distribute the governance and free people to do what they like, because we can now distribute the currency and the credit as currency and the votes as a currency. So now you have assured life, you have assured liberty, and then love simply means that because you're now a member of the community, everything is open. You see how your contributions are affecting everyone else,
Hmm.
and you're directly connected to everything that everyone else is doing. And so you fundamentally have a purpose, a reason, and you're involved. And so
Hmm.
love is essentially family, is essentially
Very interesting.
community.
Very interesting. What an
Yeah.
amazing concept.
Thank
But
you.
Ramsey, a follow-up question for you would be that how would a transition to creditism impact traditional financial institutions and banking systems? And I'm sure you've been asked this wherever you go.
I mean, to the transition question is usually one of the top, early
Yes.
questions that we get, of course, because
Yes.
often, especially from people who
Hmm.
are been looking for an alternative and been looking for a change,
Hmm.
and they like it, and then they want to know, okay, this is great, Ramsey, but how
Right.
do we how do we get this?
Correct.
But your question is twofold there, right? You asked how does it impact the existing institutions? And so, because credit can be distributed mathematically using open digital protocols, there's
Mm,
no need for banks. Banks today are special corporations that have the unique power to access more money than they actually have in the form of credit. So credit in modern economics means more money, new money. And so the banks wouldn't exist because new money in the form of credit doesn't get distributed as a loan and need to be repaid back to the bank. So we
mm,
don't need a bank. And it fundamentally changes the notion of a nation as well, because at present, because we're living in a game of sovereign entities, individuals are sovereign, corporations are sovereign, and nations are sovereign. That is, these are entities that are all capable of owning assets. Every one of these sovereign entities and individuals has a net worth or a ledger of things
mm,
that they own, yes, either abstract assets in the form of money and stocks and bonds, or real assets in the form of cars and trucks and houses.
mm,
And so all of those entities at present are legal, the corporations and nations are legal fictions.
mm,
Humans are obviously real, but all of us have an identity, some kind of a registration, a social security number, a citizen number, a passport number. In the case of corporations, they have a corporate tax ID number. So everything has it has a number, has an identity, and so the purpose of these entities is to own and amass resources. And so fundamentally, we're operating under a unified, global structure here where we're going to be accounting for all the resources that are
mm.
going to essentially start off as unowned. All the common
Right.
resources of the world are no longer, we don't need nations to claim territories
Mm,
because these are potential resources for all of humanity, not
correct.
just for this particular group of people and their particular rules and regulations. And so it causes conflict in the world between those fictional entities. They fight for territory, they fight for these assets. And so
Mm,
to prevent all that, the game is changing, and so does the relationships, and so does what they are. So they would still have ledgers, but there would be no global entities
mm,
fighting over the stuff. We're essentially managing them and distributing them equitably,
mm,
fairly, forever, because we're able to distribute the units, the
mm,
currency units, to
mm,
each individual and each communities equitably. And so you don't need taxes, because the same ways we can distribute credit to individuals so that
mm,
they can be assured of life and having access to resources so they can live. Same thing with communities. We can distribute the credit currency equitably based on population sizes to each region, local community, what have you, infinitely, so that
mm,
communities can use the credit to build communal wealth. They can determine for themselves what assets, what resources they would like, and what plans they have. Do they need more roads, trains, buildings, schools, hospitals? They get to determine. But recognizing that economics has boundaries, has, at any given moment, there is a finite amount of goods and resources available, if you will, in the global economic pie. And in order to make sure that we have all equal access to it, the credit assures us that there will be no issues of the differences of decision making and difficulties of who gets what.
mm,
And the credit makes sure that every community and every person is enabled, but by also binding them so that they can't amass too much and it becomes unfair. And now there's conflict and all of that. And
mm.
so
Very interesting.
now
But
part of the
Ramzi,
question.
I'm going to ask you to pause for a minute, and I want to ask you that one of the principles of being able to create wealth is how much of an effort you put into create wealth. In a situation where if you're going to give these credit, um, whatever you can call them, the credit nodes or units to a society, while I agree it brings in equality, what happens to the effort of individual people? Because then everyone becomes equal.
Well, okay, so that's this is the crux of the plan too, is that we recognize that just like in capitalism, there is an element in capitalism, the entrepreneurs, the business, the small business people, the workers, they're producing, they're creating value, they're creating things that society it benefits from, and so they should be rewarded for their efforts.
Yeah.
The notion of not only reciprocity but also, if you produce, you should get. And that's the same thing here. So
Mm,
what we've done is that we've determined that credit can be issued in three different ways to make sure that we incentivize production, activity, creativity, and wealth building.
mm,
And that is, so a portion of it is equal in the form
mm,
of a universal amount that
mm,
every person would get to assure at least the basic minimum and to assure life. But above and beyond that, the game, if you will,
mm,
is based on your participation. So the
mm,
more that work, you play, you learn, you do caretaking, those activities would earn the individual more credit. And
mm.
so we do need an incentive structure in society
Yeah.
to make sure that people are contributing. And
Mm.
so we call that proof of participation. So the
Okay.
more you participate, and the participation, of course, is bounded.
Mm,
There will be strict amounts that are fair, equal, and they'll be mostly based on time and accreditation and skill. The more you do something, the better you are, the more you would get per
mm,
your time. But there's a third element here, which is similar to capitalism that has this notion of profit. But in capitalism today, right, the only metric of profit that we have is your power and ability to exchange stuff, right?
mm,
And so that's limiting. That really doesn't provide for any any other purposes. And so what we have a profit here too, it's called a bonus, but it's based on purpose. What it means
mm,
is that communities, industries get to choose what those bonus metrics are. So for example, let's say it's an industry like producing bicycles,
mhm,
right? The incentives, the bonus would go annually to those co-ops, those groups of people who are producing the bicycles, and we can say, hey, can you reduce the energy input to make your production process use less
mm,
energy?
mm,
Can you reduce labor? Can you make the bicycles recyclable, reusable? Can you make them better quality? So all these other metrics that are purpose driven, that society would like to see, that we don't see at present, right? Capitalism at present, the profit motive actually forces corporations to do the wrong things, to
mm,
make products not last, so that consumers have to purchase them again, so that they can make more profit. And it leads to really dysfunctional things like even healthcare in America,
mm,
where the incentives of healthcare are not towards our health, but towards these circulatory processes of further profit
mm,
production. So
mm,
in a recap, to answer your question, we do distribute credit based on meritocracy and effort, and the bonus structure is designed to on an annual basis. It's kind of like sports. Your
mm,
team won the league this year. You guys get a bonus, you get a trophy, you get a parade. Same thing here. We can do all of that, but that the next year, when the game resumes, you have a chance to win again. Whereas in capitalism, the winners cement their position, change the rules so that they can continue winning. And of course, what you see in the world is monopolies, monopolies,
right,
monopolies.
right. I agree. Well said. My next question is on technology. How are you using technology to develop this whole creditism model, and how can this transition, or how can technology help this transition to creditism, especially with businesses and more particularly with governments?
Yeah. You hit the nail on the head here. It is specifically because of technology that
Mm,
creditism is even possible.
mm,
The notions of fairness, the notions of human trust, game theory has suffered throughout history because there was no possibility of open record keeping that was trusted and unalterable, right? Human memories and human recordings can be changed, But once you have a digital architecture that is unalterable, and now we can trust the data and trust the gameplay is what makes this all possible. Now, the
Right.
technology that is going to make accreditism and Common Planet possible isn't being developed by me or my team specifically. Some of the pieces are, but that's the beautiful thing about this. There's already thousands of organizations, millions of people already developing the tools for distributed governance, distributed currency, distributed capital and property. So
Mm,
all these things are happening right now as we speak. In most of it is still in the game of capitalism, right? But those tools can easily be adopted and modified to
mm,
run a game like creditism. So what we're essentially doing is we're going to be taking those pieces, putting them together, bringing awareness to those, modifying those technologies, introducing at first a global member network, but ultimately leading to a place where the technology now, the tools have been modified and are ready and can now be adopted by any country in the world. They can simply plug in and play and have direct democracy in the economic realm by use with this new creditism system. And so,
mm.
boom, they'll have that technology and they can instantly play creditism in their country and have communal wealth. And that's our goal.
Well said. I have time for two more questions. Um, in a creditist world, if I can use that term, how
Yes.
would societal values around success, security, and purpose shift?
Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, the fact that we're rewarding extra currency, extra credit is based on purpose.
Hmm,
And the purpose is something that changes over time, right? The needs of a community
hmm,
differ from community to community. And
hmm,
so the purposes will change. The needs of particular industries will also change.
hmm,
And so the game of what we produce will is dependent upon our morality
hmm,
and our individual choices, and the fact that those choices are all democratic and all distributed and uncapturable. They're not going to be centrally controlled and all decision making given to one person. And in those cases, when you do assign more decision power to a person, that will be because that person was chosen and they're recallable, they're removable, and so they have become experts and they deserve to help us make those decisions. But at any given time, we can take it away. So the fact that everything is distributed and democratic assures that decisions are made that are best for every individual or every community and the whole. So it's win-win-win, not just win-win lose or win lose lose. So
very interesting. And my last question for you, Ramsey. As you look ahead, what are some of the milestones you hope the Common Planet Foundation will achieve in the next few years?
well, our goal initially, I mean, it's a very grand vision, and we don't know how fast we'll be able to go.
Hmm,
That said, our mission at this point in time, at first, will be, of course, to inform the public that an alternative exists, educate them, make them aware, spread this idea, hope that more and more people can talk about creditism now that it has a name. Anyone can talk about this, anyone can write about it. We don't own it. We didn't, coin it so that we can control it. We coined it so that the world can come to know about an alternative to what exists.
hmm,
Ultimately, our goal is to then, after awareness, is to model the numbers, to simulate some of these numbers, so we can get a better sense of the quantities. We know that it's stable. We know that it's bounded. All of those are already a part of the structure. The optimal initial starting figures, we don't know yet. Those need to be modeled and simulated. After that's done, and all the digital technology has been tested and modified and hopefully maybe even experimented on some local areas, then eventually would be adopted, hopefully by a nation, further experimentation. But that the whole entire structure is never finished. Like
Hmm.
society is never
Correct.
complete. We
Correct.
don't know what we need to create, what we can create and will create, but we know that we can create. And that's what's key about creditism is that we know if the humans have the power and the agency to do what they want to do, to employ their skills and their passions, then we should allow them to have access to the stuff that they need to be able to try and produce those things. And that's what creditism ultimately will do.
Wow. Wow. And on that note, Ramsey, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about the Common Planet Foundation and creditism. I mean, this is clearly a new way for us to start thinking about credit, about bringing in equality, bringing in a lot of equality in society. Uh, I did understand a little bit about the core principles that you're working with, and I'm fascinated about how well a product like this can actually bring in an incredible amount of, to use your words, life and liberty, and to reduce the huge amounts of differentiation that exists within our societies today. Thank you also for speaking to me about how creditism will impact or could impact traditional institutions and banking systems, and how society will really be able to benefit, but also will probably have to go through some significant adjustments within itself to bring in the form of equality that each one of us does seek. Thank you again for speaking to me, and good luck.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This has been
Thank you.
wonderful.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.